Hi, welcome back to the podcast, HOA Hell. I'm your host, Michael Kushner, and with me is Sam Kill, Senior Associate at MBK Chapman. Sam.
Hello, Mike. Good to be back with you.
Good to have you back, as always. Sam, would you agree with me that a common issue that comes up in consultations relatively frequently is a concern related to crime occurring in our clients' communities?
Absolutely. Crime, safety, concerns all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. So today we're gonna tackle that issue. We're gonna tackle a very important question that comes up. It's what exactly is our HOA required to do and not required to do when it comes to crime?
Yeah.
Okay? Mm-hmm. It's real simple. Lots of people ask us if their HOAs are required to install cameras. Lots of people ask if their HOAs are required to hire security or install gates or guarantee that doors remain locked, mm-hmm. that have locks on them, that those things are always there.
Right.
Or prevent break-ins and take any action necessary to do that. We get these questions all the time. So we hope today's episode, at the end, you'll have an answer to the question as to what your HOA is obligated to do when it comes to crime and crime prevention, and what your HOA isn't obligated to do, mm-hmm. because we're going to have both.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll talk about the scope of the HOA's legal duties and where that kind of comes from. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the legal framework. Okay. California law does not make HOAs private police.
No.
Okay.
No.
It does not make HOAs responsible for the occurrence of crimes in their communities. Mm-hmm. It does not obligate HOAs to prevent crime, crime. Mm-hmm. Nobody could do that.
Right.
Okay. Police can't do that. No alarm system can do that. Nothing can do that. Mm-hmm. So what does it require? Okay. Your HOA has a duty, and this is the beginning and the end of that duty, to exercise reasonable care with respect to the common area that it controls, and has a duty to enforce its governing documents.
Yep.
Those are two duties: reasonable care in the common areas and following its governing documents is where the intersection here goes with when it comes to crime. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Because that duty, both of those duties would require an HOA to take action when there are known safety risks. So for example, let's say you have a underground parking garage. You're in you're in a condominium high-rise in West LA, okay? And you have a parking garage that's got lights, okay? They must have lights. It would be too dark if they didn't, mm-hmm. okay? And let's say the board has been made aware that the lights have gone out, or one section of the lights have gone out. It's really dark. Mm-hmm. They have an obligation to maintain those. If the governing documents talk about or call for the maintenance of the common areas, and the common area includes that parking garage, mm-hmm. they have an obligation to maintain and repair, okay, and replace, those mm-hmm. three words, mm-hmm. that common area, including those lights. Now, where does crime come in? Well, let's say they're notified of the lights situation, they don't do it, mm-hmm. and somebody gets mugged. Okay, at some point, they're going to be held liable for that. Whether it's, and that's on a case-by-case basis. How long were the lights out? How long were they notified of that fact?
Right.
Have there been other crimes? I mean, a lot of that comes into play. But the fact is, lights out in the garage, you got to repair the lights, mm-hmm. okay? Mm-hmm. Or you have a secure building, and the lock, one of these security functions is the door automatically shuts and clicks and automatically is locked. Mm-hmm. And the automatic shutter thing goes off, just stops working. And the HOA is made notified of that and doesn't do anything. And somebody gets robbed. Mm-hmm. Some crime occurs. Who is that going to be responsible? That's where this kind of comes into effect. Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the reason HOAs have that, give me one of the reasons. Tell me about the HOA being a form of government.
Well, I mean, it's in essence a mini municipality, right? It's a microcosm of broader society. Streets, common areas, amenities within its purview, and also as articulated under the governing documents, I mean, they regulate that.
Right. They're considered quasi-governmental in many ways.
And that's exactly it. I mean, you have a board structure, you're there to investigate, to inspect these features. So especially when you're placed on notice of defects and components that are intended to mitigate right? Risk or safety concerns.
Like lights.
Enhanced safety concerns. That's what it's there for. It's not there for some arbitrary aesthetic reason. It's there to serve a function.
So lights and locks.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Lights and locks are there specifically
And gates and
to not only mitigate potential danger from crime, but also safety.
Right.
So you don't trip on a crack or trip on a uneven surface. That's what those are for. Now locks are there for one reason only.
Yeah.
Okay, lights can serve a dual purpose.
True.
Locks are there to keep people that shouldn't be in out. And the people that should be in have keys or fobs. That's how locks work when they're engaged. But they only work when they're engaged. You could have the best lock in the world, impenetrable lock, super impenetrable lock. But if you don't engage the lock, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's exactly right. Those are there for a reason, and they've got to maintain those.
Right.
Okay. And because HOAs are sometimes considered quasi-governmental, meaning they've taken on so many aspects of a local municipality that the law in some ways treats them like a local municipality. Not in all ways, but in some ways. And as it so happens, in the case of health and safety and crime, it tends to treat them more quasi-governmental.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, that duty that we just talked about, to the dual duty of maintaining common, but also preserving health and safety, that sort of thing, does have limits, doesn't it?
Is absolutely qualified. Yeah.
Okay. They are not the private police.
They're not.
They are not the guarantor of your safety. Never will be. Either is the government. Never will be. Okay? They're not responsible for stopping every crime when it's happening or before it happens.
Right.
Their role is tied directly to common areas and known foreseeable risks and what they are obligated under contract to do. And that contract being what's in the governing documents.
Yes.
So let's talk about what boards are required to do when it comes to this crime stuff. Okay? Here's what your HOA is required to do about crime. 1, maintain common area safety features.
Yeah.
You brought that term in, okay? Lights, locks, if there are cameras, if there are gates, if those things are part of the common area in the governing documents, then and they stop working, the HOA has to fix them, just like they have to fix a roof or a sidewalk or replant a tree or whatever. Just like any old other component,
Right.
they have to maintain, repair, replace that component. If you live in a gated community and the gate stops working, HOA can't just decide, you know what, it's too expensive right now for us to fix the gates. We're just going to prop the gates open.
No.
It's not how it works.
And
Can't do it.
people buying into the community bargain for that on a contract theory.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That gated community is part of their governing documents. They're entitled to the gated community. If you have a gated community that's manned by live security 24/7, as opposed to just gate communities with a fob or a code,
Yeah.
you can't just decide, you know what, we're going to save some money this year. We're going to lay off the guard staff. Can't do that. They are part and parcel of what people have bought into, and you have to maintain that service. If you don't want it anymore, amend the governing documents. All right, whichever part of the governing documents have to be amended, you follow the rules and you do it. But while they exist, you have to abide. Okay? So if you have an exterior gate lock that is broken or the automatic closure mechanism is broken, once you're made aware of it, you have to fix it. And you have to do it within a reasonable time. Because if you take too long or you don't act in a reasonable time and something happens, we got negligence. And with negligence comes liability. And with liability comes insurance, special assessments, whatever.
Right.
Depending on the case, okay? Even D&O insurance might get triggered because you're talking about the negligence of the board.
It would be a breach of their fiduciary duties.
Exactly.
Duty of care,
Okay.
specifically.
Or forget fiduciary duty. That maybe that could be excluded under D&O. Maybe it's a breach of their duty of care, and in terms of negligence, they didn't act as a reasonable board would.
That as well.
You just call it pure negligence, and then it's definitely covered, right? Another one: responding to known risks. Tell me what that means.
It's huge. I mean, there's a bit of a crossover with the other ones because they're all, intertwined. But essentially, homeowners, members, report, let's say, a major crack in the sidewalk, broken light in the garage, you said, or the gate component. Things that are either under the governing documents or clearly common area components that the association is responsible for. And they ignore it. and then ignore it, and there's a delay and dereliction of that duty to attend to those things, and then something happens. There's an incident.
I'll go even further.
Yeah.
Let's say lights out in the garage, and as a result, it's been a few weeks and it hasn't been replaced, and there's been a couple of car break-ins.
Yeah.
In that area of the garage only. Couple of car break-ins. And let's say there's some cameras down there, and the cameras can't see what's going on.
Right.
Okay. Or even no cameras, just the lights are off, and there's been some break-ins. Well, that failure to act, if it's deemed negligent,
Yeah.
could have the HOA being liable for the break-ins and the damage that occurred as a result of the break-in. Because if you have a light out in a dark spot, it increases the chances
It's
of
foreseeable.
crime,
Yeah.
which makes it very foreseeable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that response to known risks when stuff happens, if let's say there's a rash of break-ins and they occur, let's say we'll get to this shortly. We'll get to the part where even if there's not a light out, but maybe there needs to be a light. We'll get to that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So I'll put that aside for a minute. Okay. They have another obligation to use funds responsibly.
Absolutely.
That means you don't bankrupt the HOA to go put in gates just because there's been some break-ins. But maybe you do spend money on some cameras, or maybe you do spend money fixing things that have to be fixed because you have to, right?
Yeah.
But you're responsible about it. If it's an obligation, you don't have a choice. You got to spend the money. If it's not an obligation, you got to be frugal and you've got to use reasonable basis. If the money's there, you do it. If you're going to do an assessment, you do an assessment. Okay? And lastly, there's follow their own rules. What's that?
Well, stay true to what you have in your governing documents, essentially. If it's in your declaration or your rules and guidelines, stay true to them. And when a homeowner flags them as a concern,
broken gate. Gates in the documents.
Don't ignore it, essentially.
Yeah. See, these are very closely related.
It's that simple.
Okay,
Yeah.
they're very closely related. Okay, and then there's one more that I want to make sure we don't forget. Okay, let's say there's been a rash of break-ins, and let's assume for a minute that there's no defect. There's no light broken, no gate broken, no lock broken. Just there's been some break-ins. Okay, and the board becomes aware of this. There's actually a very strong argument that they have an obligation to inform. A one-time event, no obligation. But it becomes a pattern. It would be, in my opinion, and the opinion of some courts and many lawyers, negligent of the board not to send, in the newsletter, say, hey, exercise caution when you're, at level B in the parking garage because we've had a rash of break-ins. So you might want to, if you're going to leave something in your car that's worth something, maybe put it in the trunk and don't have it out in the open because we've had 4 break-ins in the last 6 months and we want you all to be careful with your stuff. That is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many, an obligation to keep the homeowners informed when you've now seen a pattern of something happening.
Or we've had package thefts, cautioning them. Or let's say there's an issue that they're attending to and there's a bit of a twilight in the time frame
of the repair, right.
Of the repair. Notify them. I mean, that's just common sense, good practice.
We don't have lights up right now.
Yeah.
So be very careful when you're walking at night. Maybe call ahead and have somebody meet you at the elevator or something like that. You notify your people that of a problem so that they can be on their alert. Okay? Now, with all the things that boards are required to do, there are a lot of things that boards are not required to do. And we're going to be fair and we're going to talk about those. Okay? Yeah. It's just as important. The law doesn't require the board to do the following.
Yeah.
Okay? No board, unless it's in the governing documents, is required to go and hire private security.
That's right.
Unless the governing documents say you must have a private security on staff at all times, blah, 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 then you would have to.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't say that, they're not ever obligated to do that. It'd be nice if they want to do it and add it as an amenity when they vote on it, sure, right? But they're not obligated to do it unless their documents make them obligated. Install surveillance cameras throughout the entire property.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Are they ever obligated to do that?
They're not obligated. Again, it comes down to if the governing documents require it, which I've yet to see to that degree, they're not obligated to do that at all. Now, if they have known risks, kind of tying it to the previous section we discussed.
Maybe one camera.
And if it's like, a certain blind spot or an area that's like more, has a greater propensity or
it's more isolated?
Then yeah, you ought to focus on that. And arguably, there's a heightened need for it. So therefore, but yeah.
So there might, not for sure, there might be an obligation to install a camera one place. But there's never going to be an obligation to install throughout the community.
No.
Okay, to make it as foolproof as possible. not unless the obligation already exists in the governing documents. There's no obligation ever from anybody to guarantee crime prevention.
Oh, yeah, no.
Because it doesn't matter how careful you are. It doesn't matter how many locks you have, how many cameras you have, how many alarm systems you have, how many security guards with tack dogs you have. You can't prevent all crime.
Right.
So certainly nobody's going to be held liable to that. Okay, it's not possible. It is literally not possible.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about some practical examples for homeowners. Okay.
Okay.
Here are some common, and what I mean by practical examples is these are some common situations where we've seen in some California cases where courts have drawn a line. These are from some cases that are out there in California involving HOAs and crime where the courts have drawn some sort of line or made some sort of decision. Okay. Obviously, facts and circumstances with these cases might differ from yours, but these are kind of some general guidelines. Okay. Let's talk about lighting. Lighting cases. Okay.
Yeah.
We've had there are cases out there where respondents complain that a walkway to a mailbox, let's say, is too dark, and they've had repeated instances of people that aren't harassing tenants. Maybe it's not a gated community, right? And so there's people in there from wherever, and it's caused some fear. Suddenly there's somebody there. A request to provide lighting. There was no lighting there before. Or let's say you have a really dark section of your community, and there's been a few muggings there, and they seem to coagulate there.
Yeah.
Okay. And why would it go there? Because it's shielded from light.
That's right.
It's evil thrives in darkness. Maybe there's an obligation to install a light that's never been there before, to put a light there, to make it safer.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially because lighting is usually a very minor expense as compared to a lot of other things. Okay. Gates. Talk to me about gates.
Well, there are places basically where, let's say vehicles have been broken into repeatedly in an area that could be easily and reasonably be protected by installing a gate, right?
Yeah, and put a lock on it.
Right, or prevent, let's say, foot traffic by elements that may kind of from the public in general at large, and also making it easier for criminals to escape. Right. I mean, these could be, petty theft to greater acts of vandalism, but
to crimes against people.
It could also be graffiti, defacing things. I mean, just putting that element, if it's feasible, which in most cases it is, can be very effective, number one.
And not expensive compared to other things.
And just the optics of it, I think it's an effective deterrent.
Right.
Yeah.
And another example, warnings. We talked about that a minute ago. I didn't just pull that out of the air.
Yeah.
There's some case law out there.
That's right.
Where an HOA has an obligation to notify its homeowners, its members, of a rash of muggings or a rash of break-ins that they are aware of.
Yeah.
That in other words, it would be a breach of their duty to keep silent, even though it's just notification, nothing further at that point. But that alone, that breach, that failure to do that, could itself be a violation.
Correct.
And negligent. And then, of course, there's a recognition of limits. Courts have recognized that. One break-in does not an emergency create.
No.
Okay?
No.
So if you've lived in your community for 5 years and then a break-in occurs next week, you don't all of a sudden have grounds to demand that a camera be put there or a light be put there. Not necessarily. It's one break-in.
Right.
Stuff happens. Okay? It requires a little more than that. There has to be, again, that's why we talk about patterns.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
So let's talk about now, Sam, if you don't mind, what homeowners can do if they're worried about crime in their communities. Okay? One, we always do this, is document. So document the hazards. Specify the stairwell light has been out for a week. It's on the 3rd floor. It is very hard to see. Not only is it a tripping hazard, but we're coming up and we can't see if there's somebody above waiting for us.
Yeah.
Please get that light fixed. That's in writing.
Take a photo of it. If you can record it, especially if it's contrasting with light elsewhere, you can kind of tell it's illuminated here.
Videotape.
And over here it's especially
Take
dark.
your phone out and get a photo.
A short clip,
without a flash, let's say, right? And then videotape a little bit. Do both.
Yeah.
So that you have documentation as to the condition itself, what it looked like.
Yeah.
Even statements from neighbors that go up that same staircase, let's say.
Right.
Or elevator. Okay. And then, of course, the automatic follow-up is what?
Notify the board in writing.
Yeah. Never do anything
Yeah.
that's not in writing.
Put them on notice. Notify them in writing.
So
Yeah.
take your evidence and give it to them and
Yeah.
say, I need you to fix this. This is a health and safety issue.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Especially if there's been crimes.
Mm-hmm.
If no crimes occurred yet, but you're worried about the possibility of a crime, that's good enough because that light used to be there. Now it's not.
That's reasonable.
Fix it.
Yeah.
Fix it. Fix it. Fix it. But if there's been crimes there, especially, notify them and say, hey, this is why there's been crimes there.
Yep.
Okay? Help us out. I would do a record request under 5200 of the Civil Code.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I would demand minutes and agendas. Find out if these complaints have been brought out into open meetings and whether the board was already on notice of some of this stuff before your notice, right? And if they fail to act, you've got strong evidence right there of negligence.
Yeah.
Okay? Anything else on that aspect? Maybe an insurance policy. How about that?
Yeah. No, I mean, on the records request under 5200 request, make sure they have adequate coverage, that there are no gaps in coverage.
Yeah,
do they have a D&O policy as they're required to maintain? I mean, all that stuff's relevant here.
Because if something does happen, you're going to want that insurance policy to be in place. So you could even ask, while I'm at it, and you're giving me the minutes and the agendas, and to yourself, so that I can check to see if you're doing, if you've talked about this. I also want to see whether or not your insurance is in place.
And not to go too far with this, but if you've had actual incidents or something that's a bit more severe, were those incidents reported to insurance?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's one that's just kind of common sense, I think. Push for open discussion.
Yeah.
Amongst not just between you and the board, but between you and your fellow homeowners. If there's a safety concern or a crime concern, lights have been out for a while, the camera's not there, or we don't have a camera there, but we've had those 2 break-ins, maybe it's time to put a camera there. Reach out to your members, your fellow members, your fellow HOA members. Say, hey, am I the only one that's worried about this? As you all know, we've had 2 break-ins in the southeast corner of our parking garage at night. I, for one, come home late sometimes, and I know other people do. Maybe we need to ask our board to put a couple lights in it and maybe put a camera there.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to ask our board if they could have a security company do drive-bys every hour. Okay? If anybody's with me on this, let's get together and chat.
Yeah.
You have a right to do that. That's a great idea. Get your fellow people involved.
Absolutely.
Or engage with the board in good faith, but do that also, is what I'm saying. Okay?
It really amplifies the heightened need for that to be attended to.
But that's something that people often couch their relationships with their HOAs as being us versus them. And a lot of our podcast is geared to that because we cater this podcast to bad HOAs. But there are good HOAs too. And sometimes it's just a matter of fostering an open discussion, and it could solve the problem.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm recommending that you try that.
Right.
Okay? It could work wonders, but it's often overlooked because of our adversarial process that we kind of talk about or focus on in our podcasts. We don't ever get to the common sense. Just, hey, bring it up.
Yeah.
Ask for it to be put on the agenda at the next meeting. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, most people of good conscience can agree on
Yeah,
these
of
things.
course.
Yeah.
Hey, nobody, including board members, wants to be mugged or have their sons and daughters and friends mugged. Reach out to your management company. Say, can you please put this on the agenda? I'd like to, during open discussion, I'd like to make a presentation on why I think we should have a light installed or a camera installed or both, or why we need to have a security company, add our property to their route.
Right.
To just drive around.
And by the way, another element that may be persuasive on that front, not to belabor it too much, is the common shared interest of property values.
Exactly.
Attending to these things, not just arguably, but will almost certainly enhance property values.
Especially if a lot of buyers in certain areas will ask about break-ins and stuff, and if you don't disclose when you're asked that. So a lot of people debate whether or not you have a duty to disclose that there's, we average 5 break-ins a year. I don't know if you do, but if somebody asks, hey, is that door always locked? How is the HOA repairing stuff?
Yeah.
Like the door, the camera, the lights. You've got to answer honestly. So, and just those security features, locks, cameras, guards, gates, whatever, those add value to your property. They never detract. Never, never, never. Okay? They will always add value, no matter how nice your neighborhood is.
Right.
A house with a full camera system and an alarm system is going to be worth a teeny bit more than a house with just a camera system.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's exponential when you talk about multifamily housing. And of course, there's, if for some reason nobody's interested in these things, you can escalate. You can escalate with IDR, with ADR. That's when you hire a lawyer. When it's time for ADR, you hire somebody like us at MBK Chapman, or you try to engage in IDR, which is a little less formal. Yeah. You don't really need a lawyer for that. And that's where you would sit down with your board, make a demand that they meet with you, and they've got to. That's the law. And bring up your concerns.
One addition, and this kind of ties into a couple of these categories we discussed, including documentation and reporting. No substitute for notifying law enforcement. Absolutely. Reach out to law enforcement. That's one of the ways you can document it. You can escalate it. You can create a heightened need when you report it to your board.
Wow.
And you can kind of kill multiple things with a single stone there.
I just thought of something.
Yeah.
You could also request, and it would be harder to say if the HOA said no. It's easy for the HOA to say no to you, especially if they don't like you. But if you were to call, let's say, the public relations department at your local police department and say, hey, can you have an officer come to one of our meetings and discuss ways that we could make our neighborhood a little safer, make our building safer?
That's great, yeah.
And they agree to do that. And then you bring that up to, because the board, it's up to the board, right? Mm-hmm. But you bring it up and get the board to say no in writing. And then if something happens, imagine how much more. That's actually a really good idea.
I like that.
You want to add pressure to your HOA. If they're resistant, you taking some measures, you reach out to the police, see if you can arrange to have a liaison, because they have public relations liaisons
I like that
go to these meetings.
Yeah.
They do them for the neighborhood watch all the time.
It's essentially free consultation.
That's right. And if your board says, nah, no need, boy, does that make them look bad.
Agreed.
It's hard to say no.
I know.
To that. It's easy to say no to you. It's hard to say no when now you're saying, no, we don't want the police to come and advise us how to make our property safer than it is right now.
Yeah.
Because they'll come and do that. They'll do an evaluation for you.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
That's a great idea. You gave me that idea, but it was very good.
Hey,
Thank
teamwork,
you.
yeah.
Good job. All right. Bottom line, folks, is very simple. Okay. Your HOA has to abide by its duties under the governing documents. That means repairing, replacing, and maintaining whatever security systems are already in place. But they also have a duty to prevent reasonably foreseeable crimes from occurring and taking reasonable steps, reasonable based on a lot of different circumstances, from budget to size of the HOA to whatever, reasonable steps to keep people safe and to notify them when there's an issue, okay? HOAs are not there to prevent crime. They aren't there to make any guarantees. That would be unreasonable to request of anyone. But they do have some duty to you when it comes to this. And the more you know, the safer you can be. I think this has gone at least a partial way of helping people kind of understand.
I hope so.
What the HOA should do and what they aren't really required to do. But if they should do it or they must do it, make sure they do it. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, it's really helpful to us if you would subscribe to our HOA Hell podcast. If you'd like to leave a question or comment, especially about the topic of today's show, as always, we love to hear from you. Until next time, please have a wonderful day.